The lecture hall was massive. It stretched across 3 levels of the Galactic University's main building. Students from 40 different species sat in their seats. Some had tentacles. Some had wings. Some floated in special containers filled with liquid. They all came to hear Professor Zelthar speak. Professor Zelthar was famous across the galaxy. He had studied environmental adaptation for 300 years. His scales were dark blue and shimmered under the lights. His 4 eyes scanned the room with pride. Today's lecture was about survival and planetary adaptation. "Welcome, students," Professor Zelthar began. His voice came through the universal translator. "Today we discuss the most important topic in survival science. We will talk about how species adapt to their home planets." The students leaned forward. Some took notes on floating screens. Others recorded everything with their neural implants. "I have traveled to thousands of worlds," the professor continued. "I have seen species that can survive in acid rain. I have met beings that eat radiation for breakfast. I have documented creatures that live in the cores of stars." He paused for effect. "But there is one thing I know for certain. No species can survive on a planet they were not born on. Not without technology. Not without ships and suits and shields." A student in the front row raised 3 of her appendages. She was from Theta Prime, a world of constant storms. "Professor, what about the humans? They claim to be very adaptable." Professor Zelthar made a sound like laughing. Several students joined him. The humans were still new to the galactic community. They had only been traveling in space for 50 years. Most species thought they were interesting but not very special. "Ah yes, the humans," Professor Zelthar said. His tone was dismissive. "They are a perfect example of what I mean. Humans come from a very specific type of planet. Earth has moderate temperatures. It has plenty of water. It has breathable air. The humans evolved for these exact conditions." He pulled up an image of Earth on the main screen. It looked blue and green and peaceful. "The humans cannot survive anywhere else without their technology," the professor declared. "Remove their heating systems and they freeze. Remove their cooling systems and they overheat. Take away their air processors and they suffocate. They are weak and fragile." "They prove my point perfectly," the students nodded. It made sense. Every species needed the conditions of their home world to survive. "In fact," Professor Zelthar continued, warming to his subject, "I challenge anyone to show me a human who can survive on a hostile planet without advanced technology. It is impossible. Their biology simply does not allow it." At the back of the lecture hall, something moved. A figure stood up. It was tall compared to most species in the room. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, and smooth skin the color of dark earth. It was a human. "Excuse me, Professor," the human said. His voice was calm but firm. "I would like to challenge your statement." The lecture hall went quiet. Professor Zelthar's 4 eyes focused on the human. He had not realized any humans were attending his lecture. "And you are?" the professor asked. "My name is Marcus Webb," the human said. "I am an exchange student from Earth. I study survival techniques and environmental adaptation." Professor Zelthar's scales rippled with amusement. "Well, Mr. Webb, please share your thoughts. I am sure we would all love to hear how I am wrong." Marcus walked down the steps toward the front of the hall. He moved with easy confidence. "You said humans cannot survive on hostile planets without advanced technology. I disagree. Humans have survived in the harshest environments on Earth for thousands of years. We did it with basic tools and knowledge." "Earth is your home planet," Professor Zelthar countered. "Of course you can survive there." "That proves nothing." "Then let me prove it another way," Marcus said. He had reached the front now. He stood before the massive professor without fear. "Take me to any hostile planet in this system. Give me basic materials. No advanced technology. No computers or power generators. Just basic materials. I will show you that humans can adapt and survive." The students whispered to each other. This was exciting. No one had ever challenged Professor Zelthar like this before. The professor's scales darkened. He did not like being challenged. But he was also a scientist. He believed in evidence and demonstration. "Very well," Professor Zelthar said slowly. "I accept your challenge. But we must make it fair. I will choose the planet. I will choose the conditions. And I will give you a time limit." "Agreed," Marcus said without hesitation. Professor Zelthar thought for a moment. His eyes gleamed with what might have been cruelty. "There is a moon in this system. It is called Frost 7. The temperature there is -40 degrees in your Celsius scale. There is breathable air, but it is thin. The ground is covered in ice and snow. Nothing lives there. Nothing grows there. Marcus nodded. Sounds challenging. I will give you basic materials, the professor continued. You may have what the humans call a knife. You may have some cord. You may have a piece of fabric. That is all. No heaters. No computers. No communication devices. And what do I need to do? Marcus asked. Build a shelter, Professor Zelthar said. A shelter that will keep you alive in those conditions. You have 10 minutes, the students gasped. 10 minutes was nothing. Building a shelter in such cold with such limited tools seemed impossible. Marcus smiled. It was not a worried smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret. Let's go, he said simply. The transport ship landed on Frost 7 30 minutes later. The planet's moon was exactly as Professor Zelthar had described. Ice stretched in every direction. The sky was a pale gray. Wind howled across the frozen landscape. The temperature gauge read -42 degrees Celsius. Most of the students had come to watch. They stood inside the heated observation bubble that the university had set up. Through the clear walls, they could see the frozen wasteland outside. They wore warm clothes and sipped hot drinks. They were excited to see what would happen. Professor Zelthar stood at the front of the bubble. His scales had turned a darker shade of blue from the cold outside. Even though he was protected, he could feel the hostility of this place. Mr. Webb, he announced through the communication system. Are you ready? Outside the bubble, Marcus stood on the ice. He wore only normal clothes, a simple jacket, regular pants, boots, no special heating elements, no protective suit. The wind pulled at his hair and clothes. His breath came out in white clouds. I'm ready, Marcus said. His voice came through the speakers in the observation bubble. A drone flew down and dropped 3 items at Marcus's feet. A knife with a fixed blade about 6 inches long. A coil of rope about 20 feet long. A rectangular piece of canvas fabric about 6 feet by 4 feet. These were the only tools Marcus would have. Your time begins now, Professor Zelthar declared. He started a countdown timer on the main display. 10 minutes glowed in bright numbers. Marcus picked up the knife and tested its weight. He nodded once. Then he looked around at the landscape. His eyes were calm and focused. He was not panicking. He was thinking. The students watched with great interest. Some had placed bets on whether the human would succeed. Most bet against him. How could anyone build a shelter in 10 minutes with such basic tools? Marcus walked about 20 feet away from the observation bubble. He stopped at a spot where the snow was deep and undisturbed. He knelt down and examined the snow closely. He picked up a handful and squeezed it. He seemed satisfied with what he found. What is he doing? A student asked. She was from a desert world and had never seen snow before. He is wasting time, another student said. This one had scales like the professor. He should be building a fire or finding rocks for a shelter. Professor Zelthar said nothing. He watched carefully. His 4 eyes tracked every movement Marcus made. Marcus began to dig. He used his hands and the knife together. He dug into the snow in a specific way. He was not just making a random hole. He was cutting blocks. Each block was about 2 feet long and 1 foot high. He cut them from the compacted snow beneath the loose surface. He is making bricks, someone observed. Snow bricks, another student questioned. That makes no sense. Snow is cold. How will that protect him? Marcus worked quickly but carefully. He cut 1 block, then another, then another. He stacked them in a circle. The circle was about 6 feet across. He placed each block at a slight angle, leaning inward. He used the knife to shape each block so it fit perfectly against the next one. 5 minutes had passed. Marcus had built a circular wall about 3 feet high. It looked like the beginning of a dome. The blocks spiraled upward and inward. Each row of blocks was smaller than the one below it. The students were quiet now. They were beginning to understand. Marcus was building an igloo. It was an ancient human shelter design from Earth's polar regions. Some of them had read about it in cultural studies classes. Impossible, Professor Zelthar muttered. Even if he finishes the structure, it will not be warm enough. Snow cannot provide insulation. But Marcus continued his work. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. He had clearly done this before, many times before. He cut the final blocks smaller and smaller. Each one fit into the spiral pattern. The walls curved inward more and more. 7 minutes had passed. The dome was almost complete. There was only a hole at the top. Marcus cut one final block. This one was shaped differently. It was curved to fit the hole perfectly. He lifted it up and placed it from the inside. It locked the entire structure together. The igloo was complete. It stood on the frozen surface of Frost 7 like a small white dome. Marcus had built it in 8 minutes. The students erupted in conversation. Some were impressed, others were skeptical. Professor Zelthar's scales had turned almost black. He was not happy. Marcus was not done. He used the knife to cut a low entrance tunnel into the side of the igloo. The tunnel angled downward slightly, then up into the main chamber. This design would trap warm air inside and keep cold air out. 9 minutes had passed. Marcus used the canvas fabric to cover the entrance tunnel. He weighted it down with snow. Then he took the rope and used it to secure the fabric better. He packed snow around the base of the igloo to seal any gaps. 10 minutes. The timer stopped. Marcus crawled through the entrance tunnel and disappeared inside the igloo. The students stared at the small dome of snow. It did not look like much. It looked like it would be freezing inside. He has completed a structure, Professor Zelthar admitted. But this proves nothing. We must see if it actually protects him from the cold. We must see if he can survive inside it. The professor ordered a drone to fly close to the igloo. The drone had sensors that could measure temperature and conditions inside the structure without breaking it open. The data appeared on screens in the observation bubble. The students crowded around to see. The numbers shocked them. Outside temperature, -42 degrees Celsius. Inside the igloo, -10 degrees Celsius. That is impossible, Professor Zelthar said. How can snow make it warmer? Snow is full of air, one student said. She was studying thermodynamics. Air is an insulator. The snow blocks trap the cold outside and the heat inside. But there is no heat source, the professor protested. As if to answer him, the temperature inside the igloo began to rise. -9 degrees, -8, -5. The numbers kept climbing slowly but steadily. The human's body heat, the same student explained. He is the heat source. His body produces warmth. The igloo traps that warmth and prevents it from escaping. Professor Zelthar stared at the numbers in disbelief. 20 minutes passed. The temperature inside the igloo had stabilized at 0 degrees Celsius. This was still cold by many standards, but it was 42 degrees warmer than the outside air. Marcus was sitting inside a shelter he had built with his own hands in less than 10 minutes, and he was surviving. Professor Zelthar's scales had returned to their normal blue color, but his 4 eyes showed confusion. He had been so certain, so absolutely certain that humans could not survive without advanced technology. Yet here was evidence that contradicted everything he believed. This is just one test, the professor said to the students. One shelter on one planet. It proves very little. A student raised her tentacle. She was from an aquatic world and spoke through a voice synthesizer. Professor, with respect, this proves something very important. The human used knowledge instead of technology. He understood the properties of snow. He knew how to shape it. He applied old wisdom to a new planet. Old wisdom, Professor Zelthar repeated. He made a dismissive gesture. Primitive techniques from a primitive species. May I come out now? Marcus's voice came through the communication system. Or would you like me to stay longer? Professor Zelthar thought for a moment. Stay for 1 hour. Prove that the shelter remains effective over time. Understood, Marcus replied. He sounded calm, almost relaxed. The students settled in to watch and wait. Some returned to their seats. Others continued to monitor the sensors. The temperature inside the igloo remained steady. Sometimes it dropped slightly when wind hit the dome. Then it would rise again as Marcus's body heat compensated. A student named Crix approached Professor Zelthar. Crix was from a high-gravity world and was built low to the ground with thick limbs. Professor, I have been researching human history. May I share what I found? Professor Zelthar nodded, though he seemed unhappy about it. Humans have lived on Earth for over 200,000 years, Crix said. For most of that time, they had no advanced technology. Yet they spread across their entire planet. They lived in frozen regions near the poles. They lived in burning deserts. They lived in dense jungles and on high mountains. They crossed vast oceans on simple boats. They did all of this with only basic tools and knowledge. Earth is their home planet, Professor Zelthar countered. They evolved there. Of course, they could spread across it, but Professor? Another student joined in. This one was named Sarix from a low-gravity moon. Earth is not one environment. It is many environments. The poles of Earth are as different from Earth's equator as Frost 7 is from a tropical world. The humans did not evolve for ice and snow. They evolved in Africa in warm grasslands. Yet they learned to survive in the ice. Professor Zelthar's scales rippled. He did not like where this conversation was going. What is your point? My point is that humans adapt through knowledge and learning, Sarix said. They do not need to evolve for millions of years to survive in new places. They observe. They experiment. They remember. They teach each other. This makes them extremely adaptable. Inside the igloo, Marcus was indeed comfortable. He had positioned himself to minimize heat loss. He had his arms tucked close to his body. He was breathing slowly to conserve energy. He was thinking about his home on Earth and the survival training his grandfather had given him. Marcus's grandfather had been an expert in wilderness survival. He had taught Marcus that technology was useful, but knowledge was more important. Technology could break, batteries could die, computers could fail, but knowledge stayed with you. Skills stayed with you. Understanding stayed with you. The old man had taken young Marcus to Alaska during winter. He had taught him to build an igloo just like this one. He had shown Marcus how Inuit people had survived in the Arctic for thousands of years, with nothing but intelligence and determination. The secret is not to fight nature. His grandfather had said, the secret is to understand nature and work with it. Snow seems like your enemy in the cold, but snow can be your friend. It can protect you. You just have to know how to use it. Marcus smiled at the memory. He wondered what his grandfather would think if he could see him now. Building an igloo on an alien moon to prove a point to an alien professor? The old man would probably laugh and say something like, humans have been proving ourselves to doubters for thousands of years. Keep it up. 45 minutes had passed. The hour was almost over. The temperature in the igloo had remained stable. The sensors showed that Marcus's body temperature was normal. His heart rate was slightly elevated from the cold, but nothing dangerous. He was perfectly fine. Professor Zelthar watched the data with growing unease. He had built his entire career on his theories about species and adaptation. He had published dozens of papers.
He had won awards.
Other scientists respected his work. But now a simple human with a knife and some snow was challenging everything. Professor, a student said quietly, perhaps our understanding has been incomplete. Professor Zelthar turned to look at the student. It was Crix again. What do you mean? We have always assumed that biological adaptation is the only way to survive, Crix explained. We thought species needed specific evolved traits for specific environments. But humans show us something different. They show us that intelligence itself is an adaptation, maybe the most powerful adaptation of all. Other students nodded in agreement. They were beginning to see humans in a new light. The human did not evolve to survive on Frost 7, another student added, but he had the intelligence to figure out how to survive here. He had the knowledge passed down from other humans. He had the skill to apply that knowledge. That is a different kind of adaptation. A faster kind. The hour was complete. Professor Zelthar spoke into the communication system. Mr. Webb, you may exit the shelter now. The canvas covering the entrance moved. Marcus crawled out of the tunnel. He stood up and stretched. His face was slightly red from the cold, but he was smiling. He looked healthy and strong. He walked back toward the observation bubble. The students applauded. Many of them had changed their minds. They had bet against Marcus, but now they were glad to lose those bets. They had learned something valuable. Marcus entered the airlock and came into the warm observation bubble. He brushed snow from his clothes. Well, Professor, did I prove my point? Professor Zelthar looked at the human for a long moment. His scales shifted through several colors, showing his internal conflict. He was a scientist. He valued truth above pride. But accepting this truth meant accepting that he had been wrong. You have demonstrated something interesting, the professor admitted slowly, but I still have questions. The observation bubble was filled with excited conversation. Students discussed what they had seen. They debated the implications. Some pulled up information about Earth and human history on their devices. Others asked Marcus questions about how he learned to build an igloo. Professor Zelthar stood apart from the crowd. He was still processing what had happened. His entire worldview was being challenged, and it made him uncomfortable. But he was also curious. That curiosity was what made him a good scientist, even when his pride got in the way. "Mr. Webb," the professor called out, "please come here." Marcus excused himself from the group of students surrounding him and walked over to the professor. "Yes? I want to understand," Professor Zelthar said. His 4 eyes focused intently on Marcus. "How did you know this would work? You had never been to Frost 7 before. You had never tested an igloo in these exact conditions. Yet you were confident. Why?" Marcus thought about his answer. "I understood the principles. I knew that snow traps air. I knew that trapped air provides insulation. I knew that my body produces heat. I knew that a dome shape is structurally strong and efficient. I knew all these things because humans before me figured them out and taught them to me. But what if you were wrong?" the professor pressed. "What if the temperature had been colder? What if the snow had been different? What if any number of variables had changed? Then I would have adapted," Marcus said simply. "I would have made the walls thicker. I would have made the shelter smaller to trap more heat. I would have exercised to produce more body warmth. I would have found a solution because that is what humans do. We solve problems." Professor Zelthar's scales rippled with a color Marcus had not seen before. It might have been respect. "Your species is very young in galactic terms. You have only been traveling in space for 50 of your years. Most species do not even leave their home systems for thousands of years. Why are humans different?" "I think it is because we have always been explorers," Marcus replied. "On Earth, we were never content to stay in one place. We walked out of Africa and spread across the world. We crossed oceans without knowing what was on the other side. We climbed mountains because they were there. We went to space because we wanted to see what was beyond our sky. It is part of who we are." A student joined the conversation. It was Sarix, the one from the low-gravity moon. "Professor Zelthar, I have been thinking. Perhaps the reason humans advance so quickly is because their planet forced them to adapt so often. Earth has ice ages. It has climate changes. It has natural disasters. Humans could not rely on their environment staying the same. They had to learn flexibility." Professor Zelthar considered this. "That is an interesting theory. Most successful species come from stable planets with consistent climates and predictable conditions. We assumed this stability was necessary for intelligence to develop." "Maybe stability makes species comfortable," Marcus suggested. "Maybe too much comfort means less innovation. Humans never had that luxury. We had to innovate to survive." Another student spoke up. This one was named Vel, from a planet with 3 suns. "I studied human literature for a class. Humans have a saying, 'Necessity is the mother of invention.' This means that need drives creation. Perhaps humans needed to invent so much because their planet was difficult." "Earth is not that difficult," Professor Zelthar protested. "I said before that it has moderate temperatures and plenty of resources." "On average, yes," Marcus agreed. "But Earth has extreme places too. We have deserts where the temperature reaches 50 degrees Celsius during the day and drops below freezing at night. We have mountains where the air is too thin to breathe easily. We have jungles so dense you cannot see the sky. We have oceans that can sink the strongest ships. And humans live in all these places." The professor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised everyone. "I may have been wrong." The students fell silent. Professor Zelthar admitting he was wrong was extraordinary. Many of them had never heard him say such a thing. "I based my theories on the species I had studied," the professor continued. "Most species cannot survive away from their home planets without technology. This is true. But I made an error. I assumed all species were the same. I assumed humans were the same. I did not account for cultural adaptation. I did not account for learned behavior being passed down through generations. I did not account for the power of accumulated knowledge." Marcus nodded. "Every human child learns from the humans who came before. We do not have to rediscover fire or the wheel or how to build a shelter. We are taught these things. Then we improve on them. Then we teach the improvements to the next generation. Our knowledge grows with each generation. This is true for all intelligent species, Professor Zelthar said. We all teach our young. Yes, but maybe humans took it further, suggested Crix. Humans created schools and universities thousands of years ago. They created writing to preserve knowledge. They created libraries. They created the scientific method. They systematized the process of learning and teaching. They made knowledge itself into a tool. Marcus smiled. My grandfather used to say that the human superpower is not strength or speed or claws. It is that we can learn from anyone, anywhere, anytime. A human in Africa can learn from a human in Asia without ever meeting them. We write it down. We share it. We build on it. Professor Zelthar looked at the igloo through the observation bubble's walls. It still stood there on the ice, a simple dome of snow, but now it represented something much bigger. It represented human ingenuity. It represented the power of knowledge passed through generations. It represented adaptation through intelligence rather than evolution. I need to revise my theories, the professor said quietly. I need to study human history more carefully. I need to understand how your species developed such effective knowledge transfer systems. You are welcome to visit Earth, Marcus offered. We would be happy to show you our schools and libraries and research centers. We would be happy to share our history. Professor Zelthar's scales shifted to a warm golden color. This was the color of curiosity and excitement. I would like that very much. Perhaps I have much to learn from humans after all. The other students cheered. They were excited to see their professor embrace new ideas. They were excited to learn more about humans. Many of them decided right then that they would add human studies to their courses. Marcus looked around at all the alien faces watching him with new respect. He thought about how he had come to this university as a simple exchange student. He had not expected to challenge a famous professor. He had not expected to change anyone's mind. He had just wanted to learn about other species and other worlds, but now he understood something important. Humans had something valuable to offer the galaxy. Not just technology or military strength, but a different way of thinking, a different approach to problems, a flexibility and adaptability that came from thousands of years of facing challenges and finding solutions. Professor, Marcus said, would you like me to teach you how to build an igloo? 3 weeks had passed since the demonstration on Frost 7. The story of the human student who built an igloo to prove a professor wrong had spread across the Galactic University. Students from other departments wanted to meet Marcus. Professors from other fields invited him to speak at their lectures. The video of him building the shelter had been watched millions of times across the galactic network. Professor Zelthar had spent those 3 weeks in his office, reviewing his life's work. He read his old papers with fresh eyes. He found errors in his assumptions. He found places where he had been too rigid in his thinking. He found that he had missed important possibilities because he had not considered species like humans. Now he sat in a conference room with Marcus and several other students. On the table between them were datapads, notebooks, and cups of various beverages suitable for different biologies. I have been studying human history, Professor Zelthar began. What I found surprised me. Humans are not just adaptable. You are relentlessly adaptable. You seem to see every challenge as something to overcome rather than something to avoid. Marcus sipped his coffee. It was real earth coffee, imported at great expense. One of the professors had bought it for him as a gift after the demonstration. I think that is accurate. Humans have a saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Several aliens looked confused. Fel, the student from the 3-Sun planet, asked, what is a lemon? What is lemonade? Marcus laughed. Sorry, it means when you are given something bad, find a way to make it good. Turn problems into opportunities. That philosophy explains much about human behavior, Professor Zelthar said. I found records of humans living in space stations, underwater bases, and underground cities on Earth. You intentionally put yourselves in hostile environments to test your limits. We like challenges, Marcus agreed. We like to see what is possible. My people have a competitive nature. We compete with each other, but we also compete with nature itself. We want to prove that we can survive anywhere. Crix, the student from the high-gravity world, had been taking notes. Professor, I have a question. If humans are so adaptable, does that mean they could potentially colonize almost any planet? Even planets that other species cannot live on? Professor Zelthar's scales showed thoughtful blue patterns. That is a very interesting question. Mr. Webb, what do you think? Marcus considered carefully before answering. I think humans could learn to live almost anywhere, but I do not think we would want to. We prefer planets with water and air and life. We prefer places where we can grow food and raise families. But if we had to, yes, I think humans could find a way to survive on very difficult planets. This has implications for the future, Sarek said. The student from the low-gravity moon looked excited. Most species in the galaxy only colonize planets that are similar to their homeworlds. This limits expansion, but humans might be able to colonize planets that no one else wants. Planets that are too cold or too hot or too difficult for other species. We already do this on Earth, Marcus pointed out. Humans live in Antarctica, even though it is one of the harshest places on the planet. We live there not because we have to, but because we want to study it. We want to understand it. We want to prove we can. Professor Zelthar pulled up a star map on the display screen. It showed the known galaxy with thousands of inhabited systems marked in green. There were also many systems marked in red. These were systems that had been explored but deemed unsuitable for colonization. There are millions of planets in the galaxy, the professor said. Most of them are hostile to life. Most species write off these planets as useless, but if humans can adapt to them, that changes everything. Humans could settle on worlds that have valuable resources but hostile conditions, worlds that other species cannot safely mine or study. Is that a good thing? Asked Vel. If humans spread to many planets, they will become very powerful in the galaxy. Marcus shook his head. Humans do not want to dominate the galaxy. We want to be part of it. We want to work with other species, not against them. If we can survive on difficult planets, that means we can help other species who need resources from those planets. We can be partners. A generous perspective, Professor Zelthar said. But history shows that powerful species often become aggressive species. Human history has aggression in it too, Marcus admitted. We have had wars and conflicts on Earth, but we have also learned from our mistakes. We learned that cooperation is better than conquest. We learned that helping others helps ourselves. We brought these lessons with us to the stars. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Professor Zelthar said something that surprised everyone again. I would like to propose a new course at the university, a course on human adaptability and survival techniques. Mr. Webb, would you be willing to teach it? Marcus's eyes widened. Me teach a course? I am just a student. You are a student who has knowledge that others need, the professor replied. You know things that could save lives. You understand principles that could help species work together better. You have already taught me to question my assumptions. Why not teach others? The other students in the room immediately agreed. They all wanted to take such a course. They wanted to learn how to build igloos and survive in different environments. They wanted to understand the human way of thinking about problems. I would need help, Marcus said slowly. I am not an expert in everything. I know some survival techniques, but there are humans who know much more than me. Then we bring in more humans, Professor Zelthar said. His scales were bright with enthusiasm now. We create an exchange program. Human experts come to teach at the university. Our students and professors go to Earth to learn. We share knowledge in both directions. That would be amazing, Crick said. I would love to visit Earth and see the different environments there. I want to see ice caps and deserts and jungles. I want to learn how humans survive underwater, Sarek added. My planet has no oceans. The idea of living in water is fascinating to me. More ideas came quickly. Students suggested field trips to challenging planets. They suggested joint research projects. They suggested creating a new department focused on adaptive survival techniques. Professor Zelthar listened to all the ideas with growing excitement. His career had been based on one set of theories. Now those theories were evolving. He was not upset about being wrong. Instead, he was excited about being part of something new. He was excited about learning and growing and helping others do the same. Mr. Webb, the professor said, when you challenged me 3 weeks ago, I was angry. I thought you were being disrespectful. But now I understand that you were offering me a gift. You were offering me the chance to expand my understanding. You were offering me the chance to see the universe in a new way. Marcus smiled. My grandfather told me that the smartest people are the ones who can admit when they learn something new. He said that learning should never stop, no matter how old you get or how much you think you know. Your grandfather sounds very wise. Professor Zelthar said. I would like to meet him someday. He would like that, Marcus replied. He always wanted to meet aliens. He used to look up at the stars and wonder what was out there. He would be so happy to know that I am here, talking to you, making friends with beings from other worlds. The meeting continued for another hour. They made plans for the new course. They discussed what topics to cover. They talked about how to make the lessons relevant for different species with different biologies. They were excited about the future. As they were finishing up, Vel asked one more question. Marcus, why did you really challenge the professor that day? You could have just let him have his opinion. You could have stayed quiet. Marcus thought about it. I challenged him because I believe humans have something to offer the galaxy. Not because we are better than anyone else, but because we are different. Our differences can help everyone. If Professor Zelthar kept teaching that humans were weak and could not adapt, then other species would believe it. They would not want to work with us. They would not see us as valuable partners. I needed to show that humans are stronger than we look. Not physically strong, but strong in other ways. And you succeeded, Professor Zelthar said. His 4 eyes looked at Marcus with what might have been affection. You changed my mind. You changed many minds, and now you will help change the way the galaxy thinks about adaptation and survival. Marcus looked around the table at all the alien faces. Each one was different. Each one came from a different world with different conditions. But they all shared one thing, curiosity. They all wanted to learn. They all wanted to understand. They all wanted to be better. I think humans and the galactic community are going to learn a lot from each other, Marcus said, and I am honored to be part of that process. Outside the conference room, the university continued its daily routine. Students went to classes. Professors gave lectures. Researchers worked on experiments. But something had changed. A seed had been planted. The idea that humans, these young and seemingly weak beings, had valuable knowledge to share had taken root. In the years that followed, that seed would grow. Human survival techniques would be taught across the galaxy. Human philosophy about adaptation would influence how other species approached problems, and the Galactic University would become a place where differences were celebrated rather than judged, all because one human built an igloo in 10 minutes on a frozen moon, and one professor was wise enough to admit he had been wrong. The story spread far beyond the university. It became a legend told on many worlds, the legend of the human who proved that intelligence and adaptability were more powerful than any physical evolution. The legend that reminded everyone that there was always more to learn, always new ways to think, always room to grow. And somewhere on Earth, Marcus's grandfather looked up at the stars and smiled, knowing that his teachings had reached far beyond anything he had ever imagined.